Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, also in the live stream again. Welcome to this panel when it comes to the future of food systems. Oh, this is very far away. Hang on, let me come a bit closer. To the future of food systems and land use infrastructure. And with me is Alice Vogas and Dr. Martin Frick. I will give you an introduction in a second, but because we have sharp 25-ish minutes, what we talk about. So just yesterday, of course, the new number, global number of hunger in the world, it was published. There are different numbers, we talk about that in a second, but the question really is how our conflicts, climate change, and economic crises fuel the crises of hunger. We are living in times of polycrises, and hunger is, of course, one of many crises. So we just want to know, what are the solutions to that, especially when it comes to all the agendas and the policy frameworks that are already out there when it comes to the Agenda 2030 and so on. So the United Nations State of Food Security and Nutrition in the world projects that almost 600 million people will be chronically undernourished, while, and this is the difference, while 1.5 billion people will be overweight or obese. So there are different numbers out there. I think we need some clarity, and for that I welcome Alice Vogas here again on stage. Alice, you're the director of the Brazil Institute for Climate and Society. You are a specialist on climate policy and international sustainable development with the involvement in civil society, academia and philanthropy. And you started your career actually as a lawyer, so that was quite interesting now, working in agriculture and with, of course, also the agricultural field. On top of everything that you do already, you coordinated the global movement Philanthropy for Climate. So again, thank you for being here. Alice, bienvenue. Hello. And next to you, in the center of us, is Dr. Martin Frick. It's lovely to have you, Martin, with us. You're the director of the World Food Programme, the Global Office for Germany, Austria, and Liechtenstein. Previously, you've been the UN Secretary General's Deputy Special Envoy for the Food Systems Summit in 2021, and you signed also responsible for the implementation of the Paris Climate Agreement as Senior Director of the UNFCCC Secretariat. As a Climate Chief of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, you were, and you still are, of course, a keen advocate when it comes to smallholder agriculture. So we know your agendas, your CVs, they are very long. You bring up so much experience on stage. So again, I'd like to start before we come to the topic of course, how do we shape the land use infrastructure to really provide more food to more people and the future of food systems. These numbers, some people say 800 million people suffer from hunger. Now the new numbers, they say 600 million people. Then you've got the hidden hunger with 2 billion people who are lacking micronutrients. So what are the official numbers, and with what numbers are you actually working? Martin and Alice.
All right, so let me start with the numbers. As many questions as you ask about global hunger, as many answers do you get. I've seen this number fluctuating around 800 million, then 600, then almost 1 billion. Why is that? And I give you an answer that you might not expect. The number is because it's a UN number, and UN numbers are based on what states are reporting. Now, there are states that would report that there is no hunger in their country, and it's simply not true. And you can only average out. I'm operating with a number which basically is not a political, but an internal number from the World Food Programme. Out of our assessment, how many people do not know where their next meal is coming from, and that number is 320 million. And if that isn't shocking enough, I can tell you that the very same number 5 years ago was 135 million. So over the space of COVID and the Russian attack on Ukraine, we have seen a spike in those who are acutely food insecure, and that number is only going up. We are currently having a substantial crisis in Sudan. 26.5 million people are hungry there. 1 million are in starvation, in the hardest form of hunger. Compare that to the oldest of us with what happened in Ethiopia by the end of the 80s, and we don't even hear about it because we are so paralyzed by the news of the Middle East. So that's the situation today, and it needs a systemic change, and that is maybe
What
a
we
second.
talk about, of course, as well. Alice, with what numbers are you working for, and what is important for you when we look and when you look in your work on the numbers and on the statistics? Because after and behind every statistic, there's a life under threat when we're talking about hunger.
Yeah, for us, we work specifically on Brazil and on interlinkages between climate and agriculture and food security. And it's interesting to analyze the paradox of a country that is one of the largest exporters of food in the world, and has, for instance, almost 50% of our exports are actually food related, but it also has 27 million people living on the first. So this is something that it's also a bit of confirming what Martin just said. We have seen Brazil coming out of the poverty, let's say extreme poverty and hunger map, and coming back after COVID and so on. This shows that in the end, the solutions that are being developed, they are not as sustainable as we thought it would. So we need to combine a much deeper transformation, take it serious, this transformation, which is a combination of public policy, access to financial resources, of philanthropic interventions, but also these locally led efforts. Because when we look into this global map, everything sounds very detached from the reality on the ground. And this reality will really gonna change depending on each subnational, local level. It's not a country level challenge. And this is something we are seeing a lot in the Amazon, for instance, because one of the key elements people see is that there is a pressure on food production in the Amazon. That's not the case. The problem with food is elsewhere.
That's interesting that you raised two different examples coming from the Amazon context, but also the context of Sudan, where it's not just a problem in the southwestern area of Darfur. No, it's really a problem and a threat also in the capital because of the collapse of the government. So again, I do see the same effect. People are starving, hunger is on the rise, but the solutions, they have to look differently because in Sudan, for example, we are still under fire. The country is still collapsing. I don't see that collapse in the Amazon. So what solutions and changes, what you mentioned, systemic changes, do we need when we have so many different contexts from war-torn country, to very peaceful countries, but still suffering the same effects? Is it the same change that we need in every context? Do we know exactly, what's the pain point? Or do we also think differently from different local angles?
Well,
Martin and then Alice, yeah.
we can say that hunger is the result of one or several of the 3 C's, which is conflict, costs, and climate change. Now, on conflict, you need diplomatic initiatives. In Darfur specifically, you need to talk to the countries that are actually supporting the 2 opponents in waging war over a population that was doing relatively well. This war is totally unnecessary, and it's only triggered by interest of 2 parties to the detriment of an entire country. You need political pressure on that. But still, the lion's share is coming out of costs, and costs is a function of many countries, many developing countries being deeply indebted, also as a consequence of COVID, where with raising interest rates, countries are just not able to pay even the interests anymore. $850 billion a year is what developing countries only pay in interest, not even paying back their debts. The results is basically a loss of your currency buying power, it's inflation, and that's pushing poor people over the edge. And then there is climate change. And climate change, I'm talking about this since 20 years almost, is such an enormous monster that I'm just flabbergasted that we still not understand how existential a threat is. And if you look at the costs...
Why do we don't understand it? Explain it to me. When you talk for 20 years about the interconnectedness between hunger, starvation, and climate change, what's missing in our communication? What's missing in our conversation that we still don't get it?
Well, first of all, our communication was not innocent. All the terms that we are using, global warming, climate change, they sound so wonderful, benign. And it's not coming out of a conversation as a benign terminology. It was spun by the oil industry with millions of dollars to influence the debate in this way. But then there is also a non-evil reason for that, and that is we are living in a complex world. If you live and if you work in a G7 country like Germany, governing such a country is difficult. So you have things that belong together, like food systems, but they are being chopped up in the Ministry of Environment, in the Ministry of Health, in the Ministry of Education, in the Ministry of Agriculture, what have you. And the big challenge is to bring all these different elements together for systemic solutions.
Yeah, I wanted to add something to this, because we understand climate mitigation much better than we understand climate adaptation everywhere in the world. Actually, in the Global South, there are many more solutions, locally led solutions on adaptation that do not have enough communications around it. So we just don't see it. And we need to invest much more on those solutions, because we are much further away on acknowledging that it's all about energy transition. We need to link the energy transition with food security in a much more practical and holistic way. And this is something that Germany doesn't know how to do, Brazil doesn't know how to do. I mean,
So what's your idea? How do we do it? Do you have a recipe?
Not a recipe, but we do need, first of all, really have collaboration of different stakeholders in experimenting those solutions on the ground. So we, unfortunately, just had one disaster in the south of Brazil. And as a result of that, we got together different civil society groups with local stakeholders and to tackle food security. What was the end game for that? Using schools and the kitchens of schools that were ready to serve all the meals that were needed. So it's not about creating a new infrastructure. It was not about creating something amazing. It's just about using the assets you have on the ground.
Can you explain me one thing? Martin, you want to comment on that quickly? And then I have a big question for
I think it's such a wonderful example. Where do you see the impact of climate change most currently? It's flooding. Flooding combined by extended periods of droughts. Now, we have floods. What do people say? We need more engineering. We need more channels. We need this and we need that. Nonsense. We need more areas that can actually absorb rain and humidity. We need more wetlands. Where is our friend with the West? He's totally right. We need more places where the rain can go, and we need more storage capacity for water. What is that? It's healthy soils. Healthy soils can provide these qualities. Who is in charge of healthy soils? Well, farmers. But people are going out of farming, or they're using the wrong methods for farming because they're under total pressure for prices. Now, if we are looking in a holistic way at things, we should be paying farmers for managing a disaster reduction system. We should be paying them for climate change adaptation. And in most cases, actually, I wouldn't even know a single case in which it's not the case, successful adaptation in agriculture also means a mitigation co-benefit.
Thank you for that comment. Alice, explain me one thing. Looking to Brazil, you've got a lot of big farmers, huge productions, overproduction, exporting, and then you've got a lot of smallholder farmers, and then you've got people who are starving from hunger. How does this all come together? I mean, you've got everything in your country, nevertheless, people are starving in your country, and the smallholder farmers, they still need to fight, when we talk about the Amazon, to fight for their land when it comes to indigenous rights. So what is the current state, especially when we look to the Brazil's role in the G20 context, with new players now on the agenda, with outspoken voices on the G20 stages? So how does this come together in our topic of today, fighting hunger, especially in Brazil?
Well, it's a very complex political economy context because if you think about back in the 1970s, Brazil was not a powerhouse in agriculture exports. It was actually a country that faced a lot of hunger. What happened since then? There was a lot of investment in technology, but there was also, let's say, a legitimate process of occupying inside the country. Bear in mind that Brazil is a large country that was occupied historically, and colonial heritage goes all the way to the coast. So there was a really intentional effort to bring these larger farmers to the mid of the country, the core of the country. Also,
yeah.
it was legitimate to cut the trees, to occupy the space, because that was a matter of sovereignty. This vision and this relationship with the territory has changed and is changing as we speak very fast. Because also now we know that we don't need to cut forests anymore to increase productivity. And this is, for me, one of the frontiers that we need to tackle. It's not about just using the land more efficiently, in a way, but also the combination of smaller farmers that can feed local demand or attend local demand, and also attend the export-based suppliers, because in the end of the day, the world will need food, and Brazil is ready to export.
But Martin, that brings me, of course, the zoom to the smallholder farmers, and you have a big heart for smallholder farmers as well. How do we need to support them? And what is still lacking for the support for smallholder farmers, globally speaking, but also, of course, when it comes to conflict-torn countries like Sudan, like crisis areas, like Ethiopia, where smallholder farmers are really, they don't have the big stage to actually claim their needs. So what is needed for them to be more productive?
Well, let me start with a data point. We are talking so much about bringing food to Africa. If you are honest, in sub-Saharan Africa, 80% of the food is being produced by smallholder farmers. The food that is consumed in Africa. And these smallholder farmers, they have a female face. 2/3 of them are lady farmers. So here you are right at the heart of the problem. You are dealing with marginalized communities. You are dealing with people in rural areas who typically don't have a seat and a voice. And often, tenure decision, land is being sold on a capital level, and the local population is not even aware that their land is being sold. So the environmental and the hunger crisis is first and foremost a political crisis in a lack of participation, in a lack of political power. And this is where we need to start. We need to go into the rural communities. We need to give people a voice. We need to organize people. We need to support first and foremost the women in the rural communities, because those are the people who are holding it together. And
but that's not a new information, right? It's not a new information. So what is hindering us, or the global policymakers on the big stages?
Well, if you're
Martin and then Alice,
if you're sitting on a plot of land that's maybe 1/3 the size of this room, you are working day and night. You don't have a second to spare to go into political participation, but what have you. And I think here's a responsibility for the United Nations and for an organization like the World Food Programme to act also as advocate for people in the rural space, to protect them, to equip them with the means they need to produce, and to lobby for them on key issues such as tenure rights for women.
Alice, again, the question, you're currently preparing for the G20 summit in Brazil, so I'm a big fan of stages, but who will be on these stages? Do you think the smallholder farmers have a voice?
I wanted to come back to Martin's point, which is related to the G20, because the Global Alliance to Tackle Hunger and Poverty, that is something that the Brazilian G20 presidency is championing, is precisely about giving the voice and the visibility to the Global South policies and solutions on the ground that do not have this matchmaking in terms of visibility, who wants to support that policy, or even replicate, or in our, what we say, tropicalize those policies to different contexts. The thing is, we need to be able to listen to the global south solutions on the ground and create that space. So I just feel that Brazil really wants to leave that legacy, and South Africa will be a wonderful opportunity to continue this same spirit and taking much more of what Martin just said.
Going away from the big stages and the policymakers, I'd like to talk with you as well, of course, about innovative approaches when it comes to technology, artificial intelligence, data in farming. It's huge. It's huge. So I'd like to know from you, where do you see opportunities to use technology, especially also for smallholder farmers, because this is really where the magic lies. Do they have access to these innovations? Do they have access to these technologies? Is there even something that is realistic, or is that something that's, again, very nicely debated in think tanks and on policymakers' level, but really what's ending up of all these technologies on the ground? Alice and Martin.
One technology, or one, for me, is one important thing to be everybody have in mind is how to reduce methane, and for instance, methane and enteric fermentation. So for us, one of the key challenges in terms of climate change and food is livestock, and how can you reduce emissions from that? Because in the end, there is a culturally attached, and a lot of, not farmers necessarily, but small SMEs and so on, working on livestock value chain. So if we find a way to solve this kind of emissions, and there are some solutions out there like vaccines and others that need much more scale, then we are going to tackle two things. One, give opportunities, social and economic opportunities for smallholders, and at the same time tackle climate change.
Technology, innovation, AI, all these buzzwords. How do you work with these buzzwords also in real life, and what is your wish for smallholder farmers in that regard?
It makes me a little bit smile, because if you go to Kenya, Kenya is so much more advanced when it comes to digital banking than Germany is. Wherever you are in Kenya, you can always pay with your cell phone. And we are in situations which I found fascinating, dealing with people who don't have a passport, who don't have a birth certificate, but they certainly have a mobile number. And if we go into social protection schemes, let's say we are supporting rural population during the dry season, you can just use the mobile phone to funnel small amounts of money with pinpoint accuracy, and you don't lose any money by employing middlemen. This is a fantastic innovation. Another bit is, for example, with the availability of granular weather forecast, you can help farmers take the most vital decision, which is when to bring out the seeds, because you only have one shot. And if rain fails you, all your investment is gone. And this is really an application where modern technology, in addition to traditional knowledge, can really change the game.
When we talk about climate adaptation as well, because this is also the big field, of course, and the responsibility of farmers, again, where do you see the biggest lever to support smallholder farmers when it comes to climate mitigation, climate adaptation? How do we actually need, to come together again with smallholder farmers and to work together in that big topic? Because the UNFCCC, UN Climate COP conference, is just around the corner in Baku. We've got the G20 presidency. Then again, the UNFCCC conference will take place in Brazil next year. So there are a lot of stages, big stages, debating about climate adaptation, climate mitigation. But again, I'd like to tackle it down to the smallholder farmers. How do they need also to be involved in the process? And where do you see still a big gap where we need bridges?
Being very pragmatic, there is this skill development gap that we need to tackle on. And this is something that the climate conventions and all the multilateral spaces haven't really been so successful in dealing with. We know that in the energy transition, there is a just transition framework that helps talking more about that on coal mines, something that in Germany you know very well. But what about the agricultural transition and the schemes that you can prepare people for that? This is something that it's underdeveloped. And in our experience, if you do that, for instance, with a focus on finance inclusion, financial inclusion, like the example that he gave, this is something that can really empower them for change, because they know there is a need for change, they are worried about that, but sometimes it's just about opening the space or enabling them to access financial credit. It's not that complicated. I mean, it doesn't need to be hard science to do that. It's just about political will to make it happen.
Well, very briefly, we know from all the climate scientists that reducing emissions is not good enough. We will come to a space, starting now, where we need to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There is only one technology that really can do that, and that's photosynthesis. Who is the manager of photosynthesis? Well, it's farmers. Farmers is the biggest interface between our natural system and our human systems. So we better invest in farmers and in their farming technologies in order to get the excess carbon back from the atmosphere down in the ground where it belongs.
Thank you very much to both of you. Please join me in giving them a big round of applause. Alice Vogas and Dr. Martin Frick. Thank you so much. I could go on for another 2 hours, but time's up.